If I could have your attention, is everyone enjoying their lunch? Wonderful, good. We want to stay on schedule and be mindful of our time. There's also lots of cookies over there, so make sure you grab a cookie for dessert. It's my honor to present to you our keynote speaker, our luncheon speaker. She is Aileen Carr, the Poverty and Law Center here at Georgetown, and she's in charge of doing the programmatic work that we are talking about from a policy perspective. And so she's really on the ground, getting her hands dirty, helping to push ways to alleviate poverty and wealth disparities on a national and global level. So with no further ado, please welcome Aileen Carr.
Hello. Thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you to the American Bar Association and Georgetown Law for bringing us together. I've been at Georgetown nearly 6 years now, and I'm always so grateful for the opportunity provided by this community to come together with folks and be in conversation with such incredible thinkers and doers. Students, academics, practitioners, and government leaders coming together to advance Georgetown's social justice mission and Georgetown Law's motto, law is but the means, justice is the end. And thank you all for being here today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, and thank you for the work you do every day in pursuit of economic justice. I'm here with the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality, one of several policy research centers here at Georgetown Law that develop innovative legal and policy solutions to major challenges of our time while engaging and educating the next generation of leaders. For nearly 10 years, our team here has been working to alleviate poverty and inequality, advance racial and gender justice, and expand economic inclusion for everyone in the US through research, analysis, and policy ideas. If there's one thing that's clear from our work here at Georgetown and all of the learning I've done in the last 25 years or so, it's this. Achieving economic justice requires a clear focus on achieving racial justice. That's because racism perpetuates poverty and economic injustice. Racism creates the conditions of material hardship and blocks the policy changes that would eliminate it. It's a foundational issue, and efforts to advance economic justice simply will not work if they don't explicitly address the racism baked into our systems. For millions of people across the country, including many of us here in this room, poverty, racism, and sexism are not abstract ideas, right? They are reality in our own homes, in our extended families, in our schools, and our communities. Our systems erect barriers to security and well-being for people of color and people with low incomes. These barriers are not an accident. They have been imposed by structural racism. So if racism fundamentally shapes poverty and economic inequality in this country, it needs to shape all aspects of our approach to policy solutions. Racial justice needs to fundamentally shape the way that we undertake and execute the work itself. The mission, vision, strategies, and practices of our center are organized around that conviction. It isn't a lens or something to sort of add on after the fact, right? It needs to be baked in from start to finish. Our collective work on economic justice must remove barriers imposed by structural racism that cause deprivation and stifle the policy solutions that we need for everyone to thrive. The good news is that folks like our panelists today and tomorrow, and many of you here in this audience, are doing just that. I was so excited to hear the conversations lifting up the incredible work around guaranteed income today, and I'm looking forward to hearing from some of the most brilliant, thoughtful leaders in our country around tax reform and racial and economic justice tomorrow. later today and tomorrow. Speaking of brilliant and thoughtful leaders, our founder and faculty director and my boss, Peter Edelman, who you met this morning, if you hadn't already known him already, he had a clear vision when he founded the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality. And it was his vision that drew me here. His vision was to create a bridge between the worlds of research and policy, resulting in innovative, long-term, cross-cutting, and equity-centered policy ideas that fight poverty and inequality. Policy solutions that would advance both economic and racial justice, that counteract the effects and burdens of structural racism and sexism, that create opportunities for good jobs, and that build a social protection system that respects the autonomy and dignity of everyone. That vision has been guiding us ever since, and it guides my work every day and the work of my team, many of whom are here today, thanks. Our center conducts careful research and analysis, building the evidence base for innovative policy ideas that advance economic, racial, and gender justice. Then we share the research that we produce and educate policymakers to build support for ideas and sort of socialize the proposed solutions. Today, I want to highlight 3 strategies for how we approach our policy research. 1, by prioritizing lived experience. 2, by fostering trusted partnerships. And 3, by taking the long view. We value lived experience at the intersections of racism and poverty as expertise essential for effective policy research. We prioritize seeking out and integrating lived experience into our decisions at all levels, in our staffing, planning, fundraising, idea development, of course, our research processes, and our internal collaborative practices as well. We do deep dive qualitative and quantitative research and then ask, does what we see in the data and the literature resonate with experiences of people who are impacted? So I know there are folks here from results, right? One example of how we do that is working with those folks at results, the experts on poverty for several research projects, and lots of other groups like that who share that vision of lifting up people's lived experiences and bringing those and prioritizing those ideas in our policies. These innovative ideas based on lived experience also require collaboration across issues, disciplines, and social change strategies. So we collaborate. We don't do research without partners. Academics, advocates, organizers, administrators, service providers, and basically anybody else who has deep expertise and commitment across policy silos informs all of our work. And lastly, we're doing the policy development work for the long term. We're thinking about long-term systemic change, developing policy ideas based on the evidence, and then figuring out how to move those ideas into action. So to make what I said just a little bit more concrete, I want to lift up our team's work on caregiving policies and unemployment insurance. So we all know that high quality caregiving is essential, right? It's essential for parents, essential for children, it's essential for people with disabilities and older Americans who need long-term supports, and it's essential for the functioning of a healthy society. But it is out of reach for too many people. Care is prohibitively expensive and inaccessible. Many parents confronting the challenge of finding affordable quality care, particularly mothers, face impossible choices. Some lose or leave jobs, losing the security of steady income, and others have to risk their children's well-being to keep their jobs. That's an impossible choice. It's not a choice. Estimates suggest that the value of wages that parents forego to care for their young children is about $96 billion every year. At the same time, care workers who are disproportionately women of color face poor job quality with low pay and inadequate benefits. Black women in particular are overrepresented in low-paid care work and in unpaid care work. That is not an accident. That reality is based on policy choices. Many of these care workers have been excluded from basic worker protections, even the minimum wage. Home care workers didn't have the right to a federal minimum wage until 2015. This is rooted directly in racism and sexism, just like decades of occupational segregation, the undervaluing of care work, and a systemic undervaluing of the work of women of color, particularly Black women, that they shoulder every day. So this combination, racism, poor quality jobs, and high need, has resulted in a full-blown caregiving crisis. No crisis of this magnitude can be solved by policy wonks alone, I promise. So as we were considering solutions to building the caregiving economy, we partnered with networks of grassroots leaders, and our impact was stronger together. I think some of our partners are here today, the folks at Caring Across Generations, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, Community Change, National Women's Law Center, other folks. They are deeply focused on the experiences of caregivers, communities of color, people with disabilities, and children. Over the years, our center has become a trusted research partner, providing analytic capacity to support collective action. I like to think we punch above our weight. So we crunch the numbers to better understand budget implications of policy choices for universal care proposals. We brought together experts from different approaches and disciplines to evaluate paid leave and childcare proposals and propose new holistic models to boost the caring economy through workforce development and childcare. We found that building a caring economy requires a new care infrastructure, an infrastructure that ensures access to paid family and medical leave, increases childcare funding, expands home and community-based services, and invests in good jobs and workforce development. This work led to opportunities to support local efforts as well. For example, we provided technical assistance to the county commissioners in Travis County, which helped lead to one of the strongest paid leave policies for public sector workers in the state of Texas last year. Ready for wins? The policy ideas we've developed together were only possible because we listened to the people most affected, we collaborated with a wide range of experts, and we looked ahead toward transformative changes. And most important, policies that build a caring economy remove barriers imposed by structural racism. Just because we're taking the long view doesn't mean there isn't room for ambitious changes now. For example, we've spent many years focused on creating a stronger, modernized unemployment assistance system. Many of you know, the unemployment insurance program was established to alleviate the financial hardship that workers and their families face during periods of unemployment by replacing a portion of their lost wages, right? But it's not for everybody. For years, we worked to develop and advance ideas for transforming the unemployment system to work for more people. We prioritize this work because an unemployment assistance system that works would be particularly meaningful for low-paid Black workers and other workers of color who are far less likely to be eligible for the current system, far more likely to experience job loss, and far less likely to have the wealth or liquid assets to be able to weather the job loss. But the baseline unemployment system is steeped with racism. Systemic racism shapes variation in state unemployment assistance. The states that provide the stingiest benefits, like Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, those are states with the largest Black communities. And many workers of color, particularly women of color, who worked volatile gig-based jobs or care work, were locked out of the program entirely. Again, not an accident. Nearly 5 years after we published our first big report on UI, a crisis resulted in the need for a massive change to the system almost overnight. It's unfortunate that it took a global pandemic and saying the word unprecedented crisis like 40 million times to fix UI, at least temporarily, but that's what happened. When COVID hit, policymakers called on us in search of vetted, credible policy ideas that backed by rigorous research that could transform UI to meet the moment and provide a lifeline to the millions of people who are suddenly out of work. The unprecedented, there's that word again, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, which expanded unemployment assistance to millions of previously excluded workers, especially Black workers, was shaped in part by our longstanding push for an idea we helped develop called the Job Seekers Allowance. More information, you can read our several 100-page paper on it. I am hopeful. We have the knowledge to end poverty. This goal is not overly ambitious. There has been real progress, and we've seen what's possible when government listens to people who are most affected and the researchers, organizers, advocates who amplify those voices, and then makes real investments in policies that work. For example, the folks on the previous panel talked a lot about the child tax credit, right? That cut child poverty in half in 1 year. Imagine if it was expanded, right? We can do this. And there's all kinds of promising evidence emerging from state implementation of the ARPA funds. Sorry, the American Rescue Plan Act funds. For example, several states are using, back to that caregiving work, right? Several states are using federal ARPA funds to raise wages for care workers. And folks in Maine, New York, Minnesota, Colorado, Connecticut, Washington, we're analyzing some early evidence that, they're developing policies that are really going to address this care crisis in their states. And I'm hopeful because I have the privilege of sharing space and learning with committed leaders with brilliant ideas and coherent strategies for change. I do that every day with my team at Georgetown. They're amazing, wonderful humans who have good ideas and listen to each other and get to the best answers. And I get to be in rooms like this, right? Where all of us are working together on economic and racial justice, using our ideas, platforms, and superpowers to work together toward a common goal. The fight for economic and racial justice needs all of us: lawyers, policy wonks, academics, organizers, students, service providers, philanthropists, willing to bet on some of these big ideas, right? Government officials with a clear understanding of the problems and big ideas for change. And this fight needs us to be in conversation with one another, collaborating to find the best answers. Every policy idea that works addresses our nation's foundational problem of racism and respects the experiences, dignity, and agency of people experiencing poverty. So I'll leave you with this. Whenever there's an opportunity to explicitly talk about racism in conversations about poverty, we need to push on it. It cannot be said enough. Whenever we have the floor and a mic from any and all platforms available to us, we can and we must make decisions in our own work and influence the decisions of other people's work on economic justice to directly, on purpose, and consistently prioritize racial justice. And if we can support you from our little corner of Georgetown law, I hope you'll call on us. Thanks so much.
So Ms. Carr has agreed to take a few questions. And since I've got the mic, I'm going to ask the first one. I wanted to ask you, your comments were very much tied to an understanding of historical racism and systemic racism in this country. And here we are at one of the premier law schools in the country, where education is obviously important, and we believe in the importance of education, but there's such a pushback now that we see across the country around not teaching history or certain aspects of history. Could you connect your work to the importance of understanding history? And what should we be doing in our communities to make sure that we teach a full context of American history and global history?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's such a great question. And it's almost like, I was a history major. Yeah, I think we have to tell the truth, right? We have to do that in my daughter's kindergarten classroom and law school classrooms and in policy discussions, right? We have to name what's happening in front of us, and we can't solve anything. We can't solve a problem. We can't, talk about it in ways that are real. And so, I mean, I know lots of education organizers and teachers who are out there with fighting back on all that CRT nonsense, right? And I believe in them. I think they have some good answers. But I think like repression is real and like it works, unfortunately. And that's another lesson of history, right? And yeah, I mean, I think we need to tell the truth, and that will help sort of fight some of that repression. Also, I mean, to some extent, we're like such strong waves of repression show that like it's a backlash against something that is working, right? And so I like to hold on to that.
Anyone else?
I have a follow-up question to Juan's excellent question about that, and your answer about telling the truth, which is so vital. But the power to that, I wonder, and that's something that you include in your work. When I used to teach law school, I told my trial advocacy students, it really doesn't matter what you say to the jury. It matters what the jury hears you say. And we can tell the truth till we're blue in the face if people aren't hearing us. So is any part of your work figuring out ways to get the message across in a way that really connects and that avoids the defensiveness and all the other things that happen for all of us, white folks in particular, when we're confronted with that truth that is so hard to swallow?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jeremy said in the last panel, narrative eats policy for breakfast, right? I think that like the narrative and policy have to work together. And I work on the policy side, and I trust these really wonderful big thinkers and doers on the narrative change side. I think we have to be in conversation with one another, right? If we're publishing these reports that are like telling my truth, right? Telling the truth that we see, telling the truth of the folks that we're listening and partnering with. And it reflects a narrative that isn't helpful, right? That won't land with the policymakers who have power to change, but also don't honor the experiences of people who experience poverty every day, then we're doing it wrong, right?
Anyone else? Can all speak at once? Yes.
Thank you. Thinking about communication and messaging, I'm wondering how much like brain power and time and agony do you spend on crafting that message as you're trying to build that narrative? The example that I always use when I think about these issues is, you can say, Black people earn less than white people, but you can also say employers pay Black people less than they pay white people, right? And there's a difference there, in the agency and the cause. And kind of like wondering, like, I'm into anything that can help me be more honest and be more accurate and precise in tying the present reality to a previous policy decision that was rooted in racism or some other historical phenomenon. So, well, racism is not that historical; it's still here, but ancient phenomenon. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I think, we're really careful about the language that we use. Language is really powerful, and like we're in the business of ideas, which means we write words down. I sometimes say I get paid by the word, right? But and so we have to be careful about the words we use in terms of how we do that and how I like to think about it. It really goes back to those three strategies I talked about, like lived experience, partnerships, and sort of taking that long view. I think with the lived experiences, right? Like, so I always want to like I'm a writer. I want to edit. I want to boil it down. I want to say that I want to say in as few words as possible, right? But there's an equity exception to that, right? I don't say poor people. I say people who are experiencing poverty, right? There are people first. So there's all kinds of resources on like people first language and making sure that, again, sort of telling the truth and doing that in a way that honors the experiences of people who have experienced poverty or who are currently experiencing it. And then partnerships, right? Like, the Center for American Progress has done all kinds of really amazing research on narrative and language and and communication strategies. They do polls about like how certain words, certain people respond to certain words and things like that. And they make those resources available. And I'm sure there's tons of other organizations. We just happen to work with them, pretty closely, but there's lots and lots of resources out there. We are not, I have an amazing communications folks on our team, Haley and Isabella, but and they touch everything we do, and they're experts at this, and they rely on our partnerships to be able to sort of inform their thinking as it evolves over time.
Gentleman here.
Hi, Richard America from the School of Business, believe it or not. We haven't talked about reparations explicitly here, but if you were standing in front of the American Chamber, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, or any other major group of corporate CEOs and leaders, what would you say to them about what they should do on the issue of reparations?
There's so many smart and thoughtful people, many of whom we're going to meet many of whom we're going to meet tomorrow, who think about and write about reparations policy. I mean, if I'm talking about the business community, or I'm talking to the business community, right? It's about like what makes sense for them now, what makes sense for their workforce, what makes sense for their customers, what makes sense for their communities, right? And part of telling the truth is looking honestly at like wealth stripping and wealth and adding wealth back into communities. And I think there's a case to be made to businesses that like healthy communities are good for them, right? And I think reparations needs to be a part of that conversation for sure.
Anyone else? Let's give Ms. Carr one more hand.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
so much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We're going to have a brief presentation by Grant Fergusson. Is Grant here? Come on up, Grant. Grant is a fellow with us, and he's going to talk about AI and economic justice. I can't wait to hear this because I'm just trying to make sure my Alexa works right sometimes. But you're going to help us move beyond Alexa. Come on up. All right.
Good afternoon. I promised I would keep this brief, but I also promise you don't need to be a technology wonk to understand what I'm about to say. If you are here, you have the skills to help us in a new ABA project. So I think a good place to start is March of 2020. Let's bring ourselves back there when the COVID-19 pandemic moved many of our lives online. Everything from court appearances and meetings to school, interviews, social functions, they all became virtual. And with it came a whole new set of challenges imposed by digital code. Of course, the shift didn't impact people the same. Many essential workers faced the brunt of a pandemic-addled world. And many of these virtual systems we've relied on for school and work failed marginalized and low-income populations more, those without easy access to reliable internet. In fact, across the country, even today, approximately 18% of all Black households don't have broadband internet access at home. That's almost double the amount of white households. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic also accelerated a decades-old shift toward new technologies like artificial intelligence. I promise you don't need to know all about that. Before many of us realized, though, we became surrounded by these technologies. Today, AI systems recommend what shows we watch. They screen our job applications. They surveil our children in schools and in public. They inform the decisions that agencies, judges, and even companies make every day. As we all orient ourselves to a rapidly changing digital world, dominated by so many of these new and impactful technologies, we're forced to ask whether and how these technologies are changing the way we work and live our lives. For many of the marginalized and low-income communities we've discussed today, these changes are harmful. Many of these technological shifts leave a question unanswered that we still need to work towards. How are these new technologies transforming and sometimes hindering the access to legal rights and remedies that these communities deserve? That is a question that the ABA is hoping to answer, and we'd like your help on it. Earlier this year, the Civil Rights and Social Justice section of the ABA created an AI and Economic Justice project, a months-long effort to understand the ways that AI systems, defined very broadly, I promise, are changing how marginalized and low-income populations are accessing their legal rights and remedies. Through research, collaborations with attorneys and policy folks like you, and a practitioner survey that we're hoping to release later this year, we're aiming to build and share knowledge about three big subjects. One, what are the different AI systems that exist today, and how are they impacting marginalized and low-income communities differently? Two, what are the laws and regulations that we can use to navigate these new systems and support impacted communities facing the harmful repercussions of new technological change? And third, what legal, procedural, and practical gaps still exist for lawyers, for impacted communities that are facing the brunt of these AI harms? And how can we bridge those gaps? So what does this mean for us today at the summit? Well, in just over 2 weeks, on April 17th, the AI and Economic Justice Project are convening to finalize a first of its kind practitioner survey that we're hoping will help answer many of these unanswered questions. This April convening and the resulting survey will serve as the basis for 3 big ABA resources. It'll help create practical resources and guides meant to help you and the communities that we serve understand the AI systems impacting the work that we do, impacting their legal rights and remedies. It'll help us organize webinars and educational resources, not just for ABA members or lawyers, but for the general public. And third, it'll help advance future ABA advocacy efforts like those we're discussing today to help move the needle forward on the ways that new technologies like AI are impacting marginalized communities and the way that we can solve those problems. So that's all. I promised I would be brief, but if you are interested in participating, this is a call to action. This is a collaborative effort, and we are looking for anyone who is interested to please reach out. Whether you want to join the convening, give your responses to this survey, or help in other ways, please email us, CRSJ@americanbar.org. Please do that. With your help, this project, the AI and Economic Justice Project, can ensure that lawyers and impacted populations alike have the skills and understanding they need to navigate these new technological changes and protect their rights and remedies. Thank you so much.
You all having a good time so far? All right, good. She feels cheering. Well, I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Our next session starts at 2 o'clock. So you've got some time to kill, but a few quick announcements we want to make. One, we want to remind you of our reception tonight. Please be there on time, and we look forward to a dynamic speaker. Dorothy Brown, who's a professor here at the law school, will be sharing with us this evening. We also want to underscore how much we appreciate your presence here today, and that you came to this summit for free. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Beautiful thing. Give yourself, yes. Right. So not only did you take the time out, but it cost you nothing, because we had generous sponsors and supporters who helped us put this program together with very minimal cost. However, there are costs involved. And if you are able, we would truly appreciate any type of donation you'd be willing to make No donation is too small and no donation is too large. We would appreciate you considering supporting our section, and Paula will give you the details on how to do that online, right? Okay. And so if you could be so kind or consider doing that, we'd appreciate that very much. I also want you to do two things today before the day or tomorrow ends. I want you to meet someone new that you don't already know, make a new friend, make a new colleague. A lot of us here are like-minded. You'd be surprised what type of work we can do together if we collaborate and get to know each other and build a relationship. So please make that commitment to do that. But then secondly, I want you to at least say hello and give thanks to Peter Edelman. He was introduced earlier this morning, but he is a living legend. I don't know if you recognize who we are in the room with. Peter Edelman has worked for all three branches of government during his career. He was an aide to the late Robert Kennedy, former US Senator and of course Attorney General, and brother to John Kennedy. He clerked for Supreme Court Justice Goldberg, and also worked in the Clinton administration. And we heard a little bit about that earlier, but I'll let him tell that story during his days in the administration. But he's now in academia and has been here since 1982. And he's truly one of the premier intellectual thought leaders in our profession. And so to be in his presence and for him to help us be here today, I'm forever grateful. And I'm sure your wife is quite proud of you.